Innuendo, Book 5 of the Todd Mills Mystery Series. Author R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher Scribble Pub Press, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 5. A good reporter was never afraid and never excited, just prepared. So as Bradley drove Todd's Cherokee to the live shot, Todd sat in the passenger seat scribbling away in his reporter's notebook, one of those elongated pads. He was writing it all down in detail, exactly what he'd say in those 35 seconds of voiceover, though of course he knew from experience that he wouldn't end up reading it word for word. Somehow it just never turned out that way. Somehow he always ended up punting. After all, as they said, whenever there was a screw-up, why do you think they call it live TV? But how was he going to come at this thing? In many ways, Todd had the perfect situation, the best of both worlds. Not only did he have the crime scene footage, which viewers always wanted to see, but he was going to be shooting live from this other location. In other words, he would have something no one else would, not to mention an entirely different angle. But he was going to have to be careful. On the one hand, the police hadn't officially released details of Andrew's sexuality, and yet on the other, Cindy Wilson already knew, and whatever was in her head would come out her mouth. Of that, Todd was sure. Fortunately, it was only a matter of 8 blocks to the live shot, straight out to Lindell, then directly north to Franklin, and finally a left. 2 blocks down, on the same corner where it had stood for nearly 60 years, was Oak Drugs, and above that neighborhood fixture of medications and Hallmark cards was the neighborhood newcomer, the Domain of Queers, which had moved there just over a year ago. To the surprise of many, there had been no resistance to a gay youth center opening in the neighborhood, and the DQ now included a small handful of meeting rooms, a coffee bar, and a large old ballroom used for Friday night queer teen dances. It was here that Todd Rawlings had first spoken to a group of young gay people, and it was here that they had first met Andrew. As Bradley pulled up, Todd looked at the second-floor windows draped with rainbow flags, saw the big pink neon triangle framing the initials DQ. Yes, it would provide a great backdrop, and their E&G truck, the mast raised high, the microwave dish aimed toward downtown, was parked exactly opposite the building, just as Todd wanted. "Perfect," said Todd as the truck came to an abrupt stop. "Looks like I lost," said Bradley with a laugh. "We've got all of about 50 seconds. Todd liked to have anywhere from 8 minutes to a minimum of 30 seconds, although the later was cutting it rather tight, and now leaping out of the Cherokee, Todd and Bradley went into army-like action, charging across the street, and then with the help of Jeff, who emerged from the E&G setting up. Cables were dragged out from the rear of the truck, cords were attached, a single light stand thrown up, and then seconds later, Todd was standing in front of Bradley's camera, which was now poised atop a tripod, as Jeff hopped back into the E&G and started to adjust the transmission levels, as Bradley placed a small monitor at the base of the tripod. Todd simultaneously grabbed a stick microphone and an earpiece, which he slipped into place. No sooner had he gotten the small plastic thing in his ear than the news director called out, "A voice check, please." Todd lifted up the mic, said, "Good evening, this is Todd Mills reporting live from—" "Got it." The line producer came on next, saying, "What's your row cue, Todd?" He glanced at his pad. Night of Darkness and Mystery." "Check. Night of Darkness and Mystery." A moment later, he advised, "10 to the top." Todd rolled his neck from side to side, gave it a small crack, just as he couldn't reveal Andrew's name until the authorities released it, nor could he come right out and say Andrew was gay, at least not at this point. Yet, while he didn't know if Andrew's sexuality would ever prove to be relevant to his murder, he couldn't ignore it tonight, not simply because he had to give viewers a reason to watch him, Todd Mills, but because Cindy Wilson and WTCN were already clued in, which left Todd precious little room in which to maneuver. Therefore, it would be best, not to mention safest from a legal standpoint, to speak from his personal contact with Andrew. Via IFB transmission, Todd heard the line producer give his final count. 5 to the top. Todd adjusted his black leather coat, then glanced down at the monitor that was aimed up at him from the base of the tripod. The screen flashed from an herbicide commercial, after all. This was the Midwest, and this was the late news, when every farmer tuned in. If not for the news, then certainly the weather. To the 10 at 10 logo. Next, filling the screen, was the face of WLAK star anchor, an indisputably handsome man with a long face, dark hair, gone quite salt and pepper, and an unwieldy ego that was, fortunately for WLAK, invisible on television. Gaining stature as the most valued and watched anchor in the Twin Cities, he'd recently demanded and gotten a new contract paying him just over $1 million a year. Such was the value of those white teeth, the even cadence of his speech, and the trust that he could, with cool professionalism, turn on in a second. Good evening, and welcome to 10 at 10. I'm Tom Rivers, and we have a number of stories tonight, from a problem with the teacher's pension fund to a cancer-fighting enzyme recently discovered at the University of Minnesota. We begin tonight's coverage, however, on a very serious note, that of the murder of a young white male in South Minneapolis just over an hour ago. Minneapolis police received a call reporting the crime. Here with a live report of this still developing story is our investigative reporter, Todd Mills. Tossing it, he said, "Todd," holding the stick microphone in a tight grasp. Todd stared straight into Bradley's camera. "Yes, that's how these things went." Anchor, toss, reporter, in full-on camera. VO, reporter, tag, ad-lib, all of it, back time to the second. Todd forced every thought out of his head and then let it flow back, evenly and precisely. All you have to do, he told himself, is walk your viewers through this one steady step at a time. Tom, this story is still evolving, very much so, and the police have been reticent to release what little information they may have. What is known at this point, however, is that a young white male, whose name is being withheld, pending notification of family, has been murdered in his basement apartment in a building at 25th and Bryant Avenue South. I've been told by residents of the building that the victim was recently employed there as a caretaker, and I do believe that the job represented the first major step for a young man embarking on a dream. Unfortunately, it was a dream that has now dissolved into a night of darkness and mystery, said Todd, giving the roll cue. The video, which had been edited down from Bradley's footage to precisely 35 seconds, began to roll, and Todd's eyes fell to the monitor. 9 times out of 10, he helped edit such things, and of course, wrote the script for them, marrying video and sound into a single pre-recorded package. Tonight, however, he was simply going to have to watch the monitor, try to read what he had prepared, or more likely simply talk to the pictures. Seeing footage of marked units, flashing lights, and cops in their blues, Todd looked at his notes and said, "After receiving a frantic call from a building resident a little over an hour ago, the Minneapolis police were quick to arrive at a small apartment building at 25th and Bryant Avenue South. As you can see, there are a number of police at the scene, along with homicide investigators and the team from the Bureau of Investigation. Both the front and rear entrances to this building have been sealed off, and a barricade has been set up to keep the crowd at a distance. The authorities are now going over the apartment, searching for any evidence that may be relevant, and the medical examiner has yet to remove the body." The video cut to an image of the rectangular red brick structure, and Todd said, "I'm told that the victim only recently moved into this building, a 2.5-story walk-up located in a neighborhood known as The Wedge, and that he lived in a small basement apartment at the rear of the building. He was employed here as a caretaker for this and several other apartment buildings on the block." His eyes flicking between the monitor and his notes. Todd now saw a crowd of neighbors milling around, gawking and gossiping. Most of them, he knew, were as horrified as they were entertained. "As you can see, Tom, quite a crowd is gathered here, primarily neighbors who are both upset and worried by the crime. The Wedge has a very strong and active neighborhood organization, and they've spent a considerable amount of time and effort in maintaining the safety of..." The news director via the earpiece said, 3 seconds. "Their neighborhood, naturally. This comes as quite a shock. Todd looked up, staring into Bradley's camera, which was now live on him. As I said, Tom, little information has been released on the victim, but he was known to frequently visit the domain of queers, which is a center for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender teens. I'm currently standing just across the street from the center, which you can see is located on the second floor of that building, just above Oak Drugs. It moved to this location just over a year ago and has been very successful, serving not only local teens but a number of runaways as well. Tom Rivers cut in, his voice deep and luxuriant, and said, Todd, was the victim simply employed at the center as well, or perhaps as a caretaker or janitor, or was he there as a teenager to use and enjoy the facilities? Todd knew damn well, of course. When Rawlings and he had spoken at the DQ, Andrew had not only been in the front row, he'd been sitting there holding hands with some other guy. With a bright, eager grin, he'd asked lots of questions, laughed, and gotten a veritable debate going regarding, what was it, the feasibility of a gay relationship. Right. And later on, of course, he'd met with Rawlings. I do believe, Tom, that the victim came here for the center's services. As a matter of fact, I first encountered the victim 2 months ago when I was here giving a talk to gay youth. Does that mean for a fact he was gay? Rawlings was going to give him shit for this, but Todd had no choice, and he said, well, the domain of queers, or the DQ as it's commonly called, is a center to serve gay teens. Whether the victim was indeed gay and or possibly a runaway will soon, I'm sure, be officially known. Even though Todd always tried to focus every bit of his energy and attention on the camera, out of the corner of his eye he saw a tall figure come hurrying around the corner. It was a young man, his head bent, his long silky hair bouncing with each of his long awkward strides, and Todd recognized him immediately, and the kid, seeing the camera and the lights, looked up, his eyes red, his cheeks still wet with tears, and froze in surprise. An odd, almost fearful look washed over him, and then he turned and quickly hurried off. Into the earpiece lodged in Todd's right ear, Tom Rivers said, Thank you very much, Todd, and we look forward to any other information you might have on this sad story. In other news, Todd glanced down, saw the image of Tom Rivers fill the monitor, and then he looked up, saw Bradley still hunched behind the camera. The next second, Bradley raised his head. Clear. Ripping away the earpiece and stuffing that and the stick mic into Bradley's hands, Todd said, I'll be right back. Spinning around, he saw the kid scurrying across the street, not toward Oak Drugs, of course, but toward the DQ. Sure, scared and upset, horrified and confused, he'd walked here from the murder scene and was now fleeing to the one safe aisle he'd ever found, that refuge of his peers, which is exactly where Todd had seen him before. He didn't know the kid's name, but Todd was sure of it. This young man with the long silky hair was a friend of Andrew. Or was he more? Had he been the one sitting there holding hands with Andrew during Todd and Rawlings' talk? If so, what did that imply? That they'd simply been queer friends, or that they'd perhaps been sweethearts? A boxy truck with a smiling cow on the side rolled past. Next, a blue van and 2 cars, and then Todd darted into the road, his eyes fixed on the tall young man. He watched as the kid hurried up the sidewalk and reached the double doors that led to the domain of queers. Hey! Called Todd from the middle of the street. Spinning around, the kid brushed his hair back and glanced toward Todd, his eyes now smoldering with what? Anger? Recognition? The young guy hesitated for a second, then lunged for the glass door and swung it open. Every bit of his reportedly instincts was piqued, and Todd wasted no time breaking into a quick jog, charging up the sidewalk and past the display windows of Oak Drugs that were already filled with Halloween costumes. This kid, Todd was sure, wasn't just upset. He knew something. Throwing open the door and hurrying into the building, Todd looked up the broad staircase that was easily 6 feet wide and lit by row after row of fluorescent lights. The walls were painted a bland white, and Todd saw him just past the midpoint landing, climbing 2 steps at a time. Oh, wait a minute! When the kid didn't stop, Todd called, I need to talk to you. Just wait. Without turning around, without stopping, he screamed, Fuck off! More than a little surprised by this opening salvo, Todd hesitated, even slowed. Okay, what was going on here? Was Todd merely being an asshole of a reporter by treading into tender territory? Or was Todd right in chasing after this kid, sensing he might know something about Andrew's tragic end? There was for sure only one way to find out. Todd didn't remember the rules, couldn't remember if uninvited adults were even allowed in the DQ, particularly at this time of night, but he plunged on, unable to stop himself. Grabbing the railing, he started up the wide stairs. He was about to call out again when the kid reached the top and disappeared from sight. Todd continued up, and when he reached the top, huffing for air, he was immediately greeted by a young African-American girl, perhaps no more than 16 or 17, and wearing a plain white t-shirt and blue jean overalls. Her face round and cute. She wore glasses and had her hair pulled back in pigtails. Can I help you?" she said from behind a receptionist desk. "I'm looking for the guy who just came in here. I need to talk to him." "Well, I'm afraid you can't. I mean, adults can't come in unless they're invited to speak or do something official. Anyway, from the looks of it, Jordy doesn't want to talk to you or anyone else for that matter." She pushed up her glasses and glanced down the hall. "What happened anyway?" "He's awfully upset." She looked Todd up and down. "You're not his dad, are you?" "Gee, thanks," thought Todd with a scowl. But it was true. He was easily old enough. Todd's own son was, in fact, even older than this kid, and yes, that was his name, Jordan. He'd been the one sitting there holding hands with Andrew. Todd was sure of it now. Trying not to sound like a bullying adult, Todd said, "No, I'm not family. My name's Todd Mills, and I'm a television reporter. From..." "Oh, yeah, I remember now," she said with a bright smile. "You're the gay guy on TV. Didn't you and your lover come in here and speak for something?" "Right. That was a couple of months ago, but we've got a problem tonight, and I need to speak to Jordy. You know, I really don't think he... I'm sorry, but either I talk to him or I call the police." Wait, she said, holding up both hands, palms out. "Come on, we don't need any shit like that, particularly not on my shift, okay? I mean, I'm just supposed to be monitoring the place. I'm just volunteering." "I mean it." "Oh, man." She bent her head, rubbed her forehead with one hand, and then, without looking up, pointed down the hall and said, "He's down there, first room on the right. Leave the door open. If I hear him shout or anything, you're going to have to leave. Clear?" "Thanks." Todd took a deep breath, held it a second, then blasted it out between pursed lips. Feeling oddly like the enemy, he proceeded past the monitoring desk and down a hall with fresh beige carpeting and newly painted walls. Originally, the DQ had been in a dump of a storehouse on Lake Street, an idea born of a dream, and that functioned on a shoestring. And it had worked, not only proving to be a much-needed haven, but garnering a lot of media attention, gay and straight. The dollars had followed, both from the queer community as well as, surprisingly, the corporate and the organization had expanded and grown and moved here. Todd stopped at the first door and looked into a room that was furnished with 2 couches, a coffee table, and a couple of standing lamps, one of which now dimly burned a counseling or conference room. Todd assumed Jordy was in there, slumped on one of the couches, his long hair swept forward, his body trembling and shaking as he sobbed. He wore old black and white high-top tennis shoes, baggy jeans, and a ratty old wool coat that he'd either gotten from his grandfather or the Goodwill, probably the later. Todd glanced down the hall, saw the girl at the front desk staring after him, then knocked twice on the door jamb and said, "Can I come in?" Jordy looked up, and though he'd perhaps reached his full height, his face was still that of a boy, the skin smooth and pure, untouched by either acne or, for that matter, much of a beard. His face was long and thin, his chin narrow, and his eyes, those red eyes, were small, etched on top with 2 heavy eyebrows. The most manly of his features. A kid, that was all he was, frightened and scared to hell, and now witnessing Jordy's grief, the raw pain that was flowing unrestricted out of his soul. Todd knew what this was all about. Not some little tale of intrigue, but the death of a friend, the loss of a loved one. Todd spotted a box of Kleenex on the coffee table, picked it up, and placed it on the couch next to Jordy. He then sat down opposite him. "I'm sorry." Jordy caught himself, wiped his wet nose with the back of his hand, then tossed his hair back. Is it really true?" Did someone kill him? Kill Andrew? I'm afraid so. Oh, God. He grabbed some tissues, blew his nose, started crying all over again. Andrew wanted me to come over a couple of hours ago, and I should have gone. I should have been there. Maybe he'd be okay. Maybe it's not your fault. But he slammed a fist down on his knee. Fuck! Todd was at a loss. What was he supposed to do? Sit there at a distance and let this kid fall on his own, or take him into his arms and catch him? In a moment of panic, Todd realized he didn't know what to do, how to handle this, in large part because he never learned anything like this from his father, who'd been so physically reticent. Geordie shook his head, buried his face in his hands. Andrew was just trying to get away from his family, just trying to start his own life, that's all. He just wanted to be himself, nothing more. He stopped breathing for a moment, then blurted, I hate this! I hate being fucking gay! Why? Why the fuck was I born queer? I didn't ask for this. I didn't! He dissolved into a fresh round of tears, and Todd felt something in his heart begin to break. A young man tonight had been murdered, the truth of which might never be learned. It was a tragedy, no doubt, but it was the sight of a kid beating himself up with self-hatred that crushed Todd. Perhaps it was because this was simply too familiar, that Todd had been there, berated himself time and time again, and had for so long hated himself for his sexuality. It had taken almost all of his adult life to get past it, and even then, just barely. And so seeing it now, seeing it so fresh and someone so young, was almost more than he could take. It was as if he was watching a movie of his own emotions. Was there nothing he could do? No way he could protect this kid? Make him see the truth? He got up and crossed the room, sitting down next to Geordie and wrapping one arm over Geordie's shoulders. Just as quickly, Geordie elbowed Todd in the ribs and shoved him away. Get away from me, you fucking queen! Get your fucking hands off me. He shouted, You guys, all you think about is sex. You're nothing but a bunch of old trolls. It was like someone had slammed a board into Todd's gut. The color rapidly falling from his face, he jerked away his arm, pushed himself up, and quickly moved back across the room. Geordie, that's not what... Shut up! How the hell could he convince him that he hadn't come here to lurk? A head poked in, and through a nervous smile, the girl from up front said, Everything okay in here, guys? Todd nodded curtly. Fine. Geordie, when he didn't reply, she said, Oh, well, I'm just down the hall. Holler if you need me, okay? Oh, Christ, thought Todd, sinking back in the couch and folding his arms, sitting there in tepid silence. He watched as Geordie grabbed some Kleenex and blew his nose. Now what? When's it gonna get easier? Geordie mumbled. Trust me, it does. It will. Trust you, said Geordie, looking at Todd as if he were crazy. Why? Why the fuck should I trust you of all people? Something else was going on here. That much was clear, and Todd didn't like it, not one bit. He felt Geordie's accusative eyes glaring at him, and Todd, for some inexplicable reason, became suddenly afraid. Shit. What did Geordie know that he didn't? Spitting hate as he spoke, Geordie demanded, You've come for me too, haven't you? That's why you're here, isn't it? Geordie, I don't know what you're talking about. I was just doing a report out front when I saw you. I just wanted to talk about what happened tonight. I just wanted to see if you might be able to help. Bullshit! Geordie, a while back you came in here, you and that boyfriend of yours, and told us how happy you were, how lucky you were to have found each other. You came in here and told us how much you loved each other, but what the hell are you talking about, Geordie? But it was nothing but a bunch of fucking lies. You know what? I hate you and I hate fags. I hate them because they just turn into old trolls like you that feed off kids like us. Through a haze of confusion, Todd began to see a glimmer of what might be going on in Geordie's head. Was that what this was all about? Vulnerable boys with perfect bodies and powerful men with bulging wallets? Had Andrew, the runaway, found a way to make a buck not by cleaning hallways, but giving blowjobs? And if so, did Geordie know who Andrew had been with earlier this evening? Geordie, was Andrew hustling? How can you say that? He said, staring at Todd with utter shock. What do you think I am? Just some sort of dumbass kid? I'm sorry. I'm just trying to understand. Understand. He bit his lip, reached down, and started pulling at a button on his old wool coat. Well, understand this. I loved Andrew. I mean, I really loved him. I wanted him and me to live together forever. You know, I wanted to get married to him, so I'd never lose him. I wanted the two of us to be happy, just like you two fuckers said you were when you came in here prancing around like the beautiful couple, all happy and everything. But then he came and took him away. He had everything, too. Everything I didn't. He was so butch and muscly and hairy. It drove Andrew crazy. He fell in love with him right away. He had a car and money and... Who, Andrew? Who? Why are you doing this to me? Why? He cried in a shrill voice as he pulled at his long, gorgeous hair. Just stop it. Stop fucking with my head like this. You're telling me Andrew was having sex with some older guy? Of course I am. He wrapped his arms around himself and started shaking. You mean you really don't know? No, said Todd quietly as something akin to fear swept through him. Why should I? Suddenly he knew, or feared he did, and his entire insides wrenched. The answer was right there, too horrible to be thought, let alone spoken. Still, he had to know. It had to be said, and in a deep, slow voice, Todd demanded, Geordie, who was Andrew sleeping with? Are you going to hurt me if I tell you? No, absolutely not, replied Todd, his voice shaking. Andrew sat there for a second, wiped his nose with the back of his hand, then stared at the floor and said, It was him, your boyfriend, Rawlings. That's who did it, who took Andrew away from me. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.